Productive Pastor 96 using Notion to take control of announcements. What's going on, friends? Chad Brooks. Welcome back to Productive Pastor. We talk about healthy ministry through strategic productivity. And this month, we're talking about how to wrangle down the time that it takes to do the social media and communication portions of your local church. A lot of times I hear from pastors in normal sized churches that this is an overbearing amount of work that they have to do each week. And very, very few of us go into ministry trained in marketing, and especially the way that stuff just shapes and changes so much now. It can be really, really cumbersome to do this. But here's the deal. I also see pastors in churches that really do a really, really poor job at this and are leaving people in the dust because folks really don't understand what's going on. So all of this month, I'm doing episodes about specifically handling this part of things. The last episode was about understanding your social media, thinking about it in terms of a calendar. And I referred forward to this episode so many times as part of that of how there's a specific strategy using a tool called Notion that we can use to help out and take control of announcements. That's what we're talking about today. Now, one quick note. I've got another workshop coming up at the end of March. It's about creating a welcoming culture. This is about understanding if your church falls into the category of a static church, a welcoming church, or an intentionally invitational church. It's $25. It happens on Zoom. If you're interested in this, I'd love for you to come hang out. Just keep your eyes peeled, ears open to announcements about that, or you can find that sign-up link. It should be alive on the show notes of this, probably on Friday. Won't be there on Thursday, but let's just get straight into the content to talk about using Notion to take control of our announcements. So I want to start off with a fun story, something that happened pretty early on in ministry. I was fresh out of seminary, serving my first appointment as United Methodist pastor at a church of around 300. And part of the culture of that church was a couple of things. Number one, we had a newsletter that got mailed out each week that was ginormous. I can't remember the size of the page. It's whatever. It was an 8.5 by 11 page that was double that. So we're talking a 24 by 8.5 and 11 maybe, and it was full color, and it was the size of a small magazine. I remember we were astounded how much money it took to print and to mail that each month. It took a staff member. We pretty much had one staff member who just worked on it almost a week and a half out of the month, communicating everything. Now, this was back before Facebook was as big of a deal it was, and it was loaded with pictures, but just the sheer production time as far as resources were concerned. This thing took so much time with folks. And then there's also a culture of having congregational announcements at the church, pulpit announcements. How many of you are serving in a church where people think if the pastor just announces it from the pulpit, everybody will know? Well, friends, that doesn't happen either. Even if they are there that Sunday, they might be tuned out. They might be coming in late. They might not be paying attention. The person doing the announcements might not be doing the best job that they can be. Announcements are crazy, and we have to take care of them. So we had a funny thing happen at that church. At one point in time, if you wanted a pulpit announcement about anything, you could have a pulpit announcement made. And we had 10 or 15 minutes of announcements almost at that church. We were trying to fix it. I had a person that I loved. I had a great relationship with them. They were beloved in the church. They were awesome. But they came to me one Sunday, and this church had multiple services, and like a lot of Methodist churches, had multiple congregations. And they wanted a pulpit announcement to be made at all three of our worship services on Sunday that their family there was going to be a bridal shower for her daughter in the church parlor, and they wanted a pulpit announcement and the picture and the whole 9 yards. And I told her, I said, I'm not going to do that. And she kind of looked at me, and she was a little frustrated. She was a bit mad. And I told her, I said, here's the thing. We're really trying to hone in on pulpit announcements, and I just don't think that's the most appropriate way for us to announce something like that, because not everybody is going to necessarily need to come to that. And she said, well, everybody's welcome. Everybody's invited. I said, okay. So here's my rule. This is kind of the way I'm filtering this going forward. If I show up to your event with 27th grade boys, is it going to be appropriate? And she looked at me and said, well, they probably wouldn't have a very fun time. And I said, they'd probably be pretty disruptive too. And she said, oh yeah, 27th grade boys at a bridal shower would be kind of awkward. And I said, that's why we're not going to do a pulpit announcement. And she understood. We worked through it. It was fine. It was totally cool. But that became a joke at that staff, was the 27th grade boys rule. And that's one way that we kind of try to take control of announcements, because they're like gremlins. They get wet and they eat after midnight, and they just keep on growing and growing and growing. That's the quandary. That's the first move we're going to talk about today, is the quandary. Is that announcements about events can just get really, really complicated. And sometimes we feel like if we just over-communicate this like crazy, everybody will be aware of it. But friends, I think that sometimes when we over-communicate every single thing, that we actually find that people are less interested, and they might even hear it less. There's definitely a signal to noise thing, I think, that happens if you're trying to tell somebody, hey, here's 10 things you need to know. Everything you add to that is a lessen in the likelihood that they're going to be aware and be able to listen to that. Now, some churches come in and think, just let's put it on Facebook, let's put it on social, let's put it on Instagram, let's make a TikTok video about it. And it adds up the time to create these things and the resources. Usually there's not a strategy for it. And then you go on your church Facebook page. Let's be honest, your church Facebook page should be something you're really, really strategic about. If you're reaching primarily people over the age of 35 or 40, Facebook is where they go. I don't go to Google to find out about a restaurant or about a church or about a business or anything anymore. I just look on Facebook. And when you pop up, if all you're showing is some clip art graphic that was quickly made on Canva, and we're going to talk about that in the next episode, about how to use Canva more effectively. But it's just, all it is just announcements, and there's no likes, there's no comments, there's no shares, there's no engagement, there's no nothing. I'm going to think this place looks a little dull, and it might just be too busy for me. So think about that sort of a thing. So just trying to put it on Facebook a bunch, especially if you have a recurring bi-weekly event, and I see that every third post is for this bi-weekly event, that's an indicator there's no strategy that's going on. And also, you're not telling any stories when all you're doing is just making these just kind of blanket announcements, whether it's visual or whether it's inside of an email or something like that. Like, you might send out a church email. How many things are you announcing in your church email? Like, that can get kind of chaotic as well. And there's also the pressure about images, which we talked a little bit about last week. We're going to talk about images on the whole episode next week. But we end up just creating this super, super overcomplicated thing to try to announce stuff. And I have the sneaking suspicion that less people actually come because of the way we're communicating about it. That's our quandary. So here's the solution. What if you had one place each week for everything, and people get used to this? They know, hey, the church always has this place that has a one page with every single thing that I might need, and I can find it there, and it's always in the exact same place. Now, this sounds beautiful. This sounds like it'd be a great thing, but some of you might be saying, Chad, that just sounds way too complicated. We don't really have a webmaster. I don't have any web skills. How are people going to find this? That's what we're going to talk about this episode. But so hear me out. If you had one place that had everything was there, it was put in there easily, you could add in any necessary links about registration, about signups, about, where's this going to be, who's in charge of this, who can I contact to find out more information. And you had that stuff on there. And then folks also knew, hey, we can begin expecting this communication, and it's going to be clearly laid out in the exact same places every single week or every single month. Friends, that begins to streamline your communication strategy rapidly. Now, the last church I pastored full-time, we came up with this thing, and we called it the fridge sheet. And what we did was we did this, and this was during COVID, when we were also getting really, really busy. And so every single week, or actually we did it every single month. Like, we didn't even do it this week by week. We did this once a month. We built what we called the fridge sheet. It's the idea of when things matter, when things are important, you put them on your refrigerator. We heard this from parents with young families that had whiteboard calendars on their fridge. They had a menu for the week on the fridge. They had a list of all the activities, the things the kids were doing that week. They put it on the fridge, that sort of thing. So we called it the fridge sheet. We kind of went a little bit tongue-in-cheek with it. But on the fridge sheet, what we did was we put every single thing that was going on that church that month that you needed to know. We also would put a digital copy of this inside Google Drive, and we had links attached to it. And we began to see a lot of traction. People were going to realize, hey, this thing's really, really handy. We got to the point where we knew we printed out a certain number of these each Sunday. And when that Sunday was done, we actually counted to see how many we still had left, because we didn't give these to people. We told people where these were. So when we did kind of the brief rundown at announcements on Sunday morning worship, we talked about one thing. We announced one thing and made it compelling. And then we said, hey, if you want to know every single thing that's going on at the church this month, go grab a fridge sheet at the table in the back when worship is over and take it home. So clear, compelling, easy way to do this. Now, here was the problem. We found out that creating this inside of Google Docs and sharing it in Drive, there was a lot of little problems, a lot of potential hiccups. Every time I tried to delegate this, one of the places the delegation would fall is the sharing settings. And it might have been a little bit too complicated for somebody to get access to it when we forgot to change the sharing permissions. That sort of stuff. But we slowly began to get it worked out. We still understood it, but it was still a little difficult. It was something that I began realizing, this is still going to be a little bit of a reach for a church that might not be as technologically savvy. But this is where you can share this link, and this is the change this can make. I'm going to talk about this before I share with you the easy way to do this. So think about this. You make a Monday post on social saying, hey, this is this week at Normal Church. And you say, hey, we're really excited about all the ministry we have going on, kind of 2 or 3 compelling sentences about being involved in the church. And then you share the link to download the week sheet or the month sheet right there at the end of the post. If you send out a weekly text, if your church uses some sort of a text messaging system to communicate with people, you think through that weekly text that you send out, whenever you send that out, and then you add in the link so the person can go straight to the page. If you do weekly emails at your church rather than doing an email newsletter that's full of stuff, hitting the signal to noise ratio, kind of hitting major failure points and all that sort of thing, you instead realize, and I talked about email a few episodes back, we didn't go into this side. The email newsletter is a place that churches should definitely be exploring right now, but in different ways than we used to do it. I love getting Adam Weber from Embrace Church in Sioux Falls because it's a story. It's encouraging. It's sometimes it's devotional. It makes me feel good about myself as I read it, and then he'll tell about one thing at the church, and that's it. So what if your weekly email was just focused on one thing? A lot easier to write, a lot less just formatting and the frustrations, all that kind of stuff. Then at the bottom of the email, you say, hey, if you want to know what's going on in the life of our church this week or this month, here's the schedule. And you put a link to the digital sheet. So you understand some of those practices that are there. So a few months back, this is how we're going to get into the how here now. A few months back, I stumbled into Pulpit AI, an amazing, fantastic tool that it made it so much easier to create discipleship resources for my local church. Now, at my last full-time appointment, besides just the fridge sheet, we were also doing something called the home sheet. There was a devotional take-home that was designed for you to continue the conversation from Sunday morning with some additional scripture readings, some questions, that sort of thing. And it took me about 2 hours a week to put together the home sheet. Now, we did the exact same thing. We knew how many of those we put out every single week. We'd count how many were left. It was a way for us to kind of engage, is this strategy working very well? But I knew that if you put discipleship activities and thoughts and extra prayers and that kind of stuff into the hands of folks that was related to Sunday, it was a fantastic transition to people thinking about their own private spiritual life. And so when Pulpit AI came out, I'm now serving a small church of like 20 people that's 30 miles away from me, and I'm thinking I've got to find a way to do this, but what I don't have is the margin to do the old paper home sheet. And also because of the schedule of my sermon writing and that sort of thing, and I've also begun preaching a lot more extemporaneously. The whole problem with the home sheet idea was if whoever is preaching kind of really gets going that morning, or maybe discover something inside of their preaching that they weren't planning on that really brings it home or something like that, the fridge sheet or the home sheet would not accommodate it. Too many sheets, y'all. I'm calling the wrong things. But the home sheet would not accommodate it. Well, what Pulpit AI does, I had Michael Whittle, the CEO from Pulpit AI, come on an earlier episode of the podcast. I'll link to that in the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/096. But what you do is you upload the audio or the video of a sermon, and this is a language model that was trained on human speaking, not writing. The AI model analyzes the sermon and then gives you all sorts of things that you can use to resource your congregation. And I realized, okay, yeah, this is possible. One of the things I also learned this last year is I've begun using Notion, which is a productivity software. It builds databases. It's like super nerdy. I like Notion for a handful of very, very specific things. I know folks that run their whole lives in Notion. But what I learned about Notion was that Notion allows you to publish any single thing you put on Notion, any single note or any single file, all of that kind of stuff. It allows you to publish that as a standalone web page. And so all you do is just click share. Like it's not some complicated, 3 or 4 click process like it was in Google Docs or Google Drive. And it just shares it instantly to a standalone URL that can be accessed by anybody off of the internet, and just share the link and they can find the link. Like that's it. It's super simple. It's easy to do. It's also it's what we call it's a what you see is what you get editor. And so what that means is you're not having to code. There's no complicated content blocks. It functions just like a word processor that you and I are used to. You can put links into it, all that kind of stuff. You can drop images, all of those things. But it's a what you see is what you get website builder. And I was finding there are people that were creating some decently complex websites entirely off of a Notion page. That's when I realized, okay, wow, I can combine this together. I can use these tools. I can use Pulpit AI, and I can export this and share this every week with my congregation as a discipleship tool. And it took probably 10 minutes total to copy the whole document, the whole 9 yards. I'm not going to go into that idea so much. If you want to know more about that, hit me up on any of the socials at Rev Chad Brooks. I can send you a link to where you can get this template, that kind of stuff. But what I also realized as prepping out for this is you can take the fridge sheet idea. You can take the idea of creating a standalone web page that you can edit super easy and from anywhere, from your phone even. And it publishes it instantly, and anybody can access it anywhere you go. And so you don't have to create a bunch of these. You could literally just redo the exact same page every time the page needs an update. And so think about this. You build out what the activities are at your church that month. You can have the top section of recurring. Then you have a bottom section of special events that are going on for that month. Put in like a 2-sentence, solid description for it. If there's a link to register or sign up or pay a fee, you can drop that link inside of there. And then you share the page. And what I would tell you to do is, you go into Notion, you do the share, you share as a web page. And then you take that big, huge, long link, and then you go to bit.ly, bit.ly. It's a free link shortener. And you can shorten that link, and you can even customize the back end of the link. Like every single productive pastor is bit.ly/prodpastor, and then the number of the episode. So you could even be like First Church Normal Announcements or First Church Weekly Sheet, that sort of a thing, to build that in there. And so now you've got a link that has all of your church activities and events that's created with Notion in a really, really simple and easy to use web page that anybody can use. The delegation chain here is not going to be that complicated. And you begin dropping that link into places rather than feeling the need to share all of the crazy announcements. Now, a couple of best practice for this idea, for this strategy. Number one, have a standard format. Do event, date, place, and the title. The standardization and keeping this clean is going to make it so much more effective. The second thing is this, and I talked about this a little bit ago, but do a super simple 2 to 3 sentence about explaining what it is and making it compelling. Your goal is for people to say, this sounds like something I might want to be part about. You can iterate that. And you also use that statement in other places. You have a church calendar, you need an event description, drop in the exact same description. You do still do some old school paper newsletter each month that goes out. use the exact same description. You have people giving announcements and they don't know what to say about that. Use the 2 to 3 sentences. Keep the same description everywhere. For some special events, you do want to make some sort of a Facebook post about it. Here's the deal. Come up with a great, beautiful, clean picture. Don't cover it in words. And use the 2 to 3 sentence description as the body of the post. The next thing you can do is this. Save recurring events. Now, you might have something that comes up every quarter. Just copy paste it in and out. There's no need. You can build up some sort of a library. You can build a database in Notion for all the different events you might have at your church every year. And once you've workshopped and you really got that description and those details in really well, you can save it all inside of a Notion database. And when the event comes back up, you copy paste the description, you change the date and the time, that sort of a thing, and then it shows right back up. In reality, you can probably end up creating this sheet in around 10 minutes once you get the hang of it. And not only to say you can create this easy, I've actually got a template for you, an example in the show notes that I've built for you out in Notion. And I have it saved in Notion as a template. So all you have to do is copy paste it into your own Notion and begin customizing it and building it out for your church. I've already done the work for you. You can find that revchadbrooks.com/PPP/069. I'll give you the template. It's yours. It's my gift to you because it makes things so much cleaner. Now, we started off this episode just talking about the quandary that announcements can be a bear to wrestle down. And what I hope you've heard over this episode is we can apply a little bit of strategy to streamline this, to trim this down, because here's the deal. This will give you more space to not just be doing the busy work of ministry. It will give you more time and more space to be with people face to face, doing the job for the reason you got into the job. It'll also clean up your social and might not make it look chaotic and hectic. And it will also give you the time to think through some more deeper practices of communication, because communication, we're not trying to save time on it so we don't have to do so much of it anymore. We're trying to save some time on it so we can be more effective with it. I think relationships now are stronger than anything else we have in the church. And the way that we could communicate those relationships to people matters just of the utmost importance. So thanks for hanging out in this episode of Productive Pastor. It's great to always be here with you. You're giving me your time, like 22 minutes of your life you've given to me by listening to this episode. Thankful for it. Thank you so much, my friends. If you want to know more about this, a couple ways you can engage. Sign up for the Productive Pastor emails, the show notes, and come hang out with us in Facebook at the Productive Pastor community. It's a productivity party. Over 1,000 pastors are in there hanging out, encouraging each other in healthy ministry through strategic productivity. I'll be back in the next episode. We're going to talk about Canva, talk about good images. We're going to talk about how to not waste so much time making stuff look bad, and instead get more time, more margin for the ministry job that you are called to. I'll see you back on that episode.